The cold winter of 1944 had already claimed countless lives, but nothing in the Allied command rooms had prepared them for what lay ahead. A stack of intercepted intelligence reports landed on the desk of General Dwight Eisenhower, each stamped with urgent red letters. Top secret. As he flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowed and a chill ran down his spine. The Germans weren't just building tanks or jets anymore. They were hiding something far more terrifying, something that could rewrite the fate of the war. Rumors had been trickling in for months, whispers of a weapon so advanced, so deadly, that entire cities could fall before anyone even realized what had struck. Soldiers returning from the front murmured in disbelief, passing along tales of unprecedented firepower, of a force that defied conventional war. And now it was no longer rumor. The reports were detailed, precise, and impossible to ignore. The weapon itself remained shrouded in mystery. Its description was cryptic, deliberately vague, as if the Germans themselves feared the very knowledge of it. Was it a massive gun capable of raining destruction from miles away? Or some kind of aerial terror, faster and deadlier than anything the Allies had seen? Each page only deepened the sense of dread, every line a reminder that the balance of power could shift in an instant. In command rooms across Europe, officers exchanged tense glances. Maps were scrutinized, strategies reconsidered, and urgent messages dispatched. One thing was clear: the world was standing on the edge of a precipice. If this weapon were unleashed, nothing and no one would be safe. And yet, the true nature of the threat remained hidden, a shadow in the fog of war, waiting to be revealed. The first whispers had been dismissed as wartime exaggeration, tales of a weapon so advanced it seemed almost science fiction. But as intelligence officers pored over intercepted communications and spy reports, disbelief turned to alarm. Germany was developing a secret arsenal, a weapon unlike anything the Allies had ever faced. They called it the V3, though its code name barely hinted at the horror it could unleash: a colossal supergun, capable of firing shells with devastating power across hundreds of miles, able to strike cities from the safety of hidden bunkers deep behind enemy lines. The origins of the V3 were rooted in ambition, genius, and an unsettling fanaticism. At the heart of the project were engineers who were as brilliant as they were devoted to the Nazi cause. One of the leading minds, a physicist named August Coenders, had spent years experimenting with multi-chambered gun technology. His notebooks revealed an obsession with power, precision, and destruction. Every schematic, every formula seemed to pulse with a cold, mechanical certainty. These men were creating more than weapons. They were crafting instruments of terror. Allied spies had been risking their lives for months to gather fragments of this puzzle. One report told of a reconnaissance plane barely escaping a storm of anti-aircraft fire as it captured images of enormous construction sites hidden in the forests of northern France. Another described a courier intercepted in Brussels, clutching blueprints that detailed the weapon's immense size and horrifying potential. Each piece of information was a puzzle piece in a nightmare, revealing a machine designed not merely to kill soldiers, but to crush cities, to break the very morale of nations. Yet even as the Allies digested the intelligence, the reality seemed almost unbelievable. The scale of the project, the sophistication of the technology, the sheer audacity, it was hard to fathom. Generals who had faced countless threats across Europe found themselves shaken. The report suggested that a single launch could obliterate London from hundreds of miles away, and if multiple installations became operational, the devastation could be exponential. Entire populations could be wiped out before anyone had the chance to react. Meanwhile, behind the front lines, German engineers worked in secrecy, often under brutal conditions. Prisoners and forced laborers toiled to assemble the massive gun barrels, to construct reinforced bunkers that could withstand bombardment, and to perfect the mechanics that would allow shells to reach astonishing distances. The scientists moved like shadows through their labs, consumed by calculations and experiments, seemingly indifferent to the human cost of their obsession. Their fanaticism was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a combination of intellect and ideology that created a weapon capable of changing the course of history. Allied intelligence officers knew they were running out of time. Intercepted radio transmissions indicated that test firings were imminent. One decoded message hinted at a prototype ready for deployment, a single gun capable of sending shells hundreds of kilometers, aimed at the heart of Allied supply lines. Another report from an agent who had infiltrated a German facility described the eerie silence that fell over the surrounding forests whenever tests were conducted, a silence punctuated by the thunderous roar of the V3, capable of shaking the earth itself. The psychological impact of the weapon was as dangerous as its physical power. Reports of its existence alone were enough to sow fear and doubt among Allied troops and civilians. Officers struggled to reassure their men, but anxiety spread quickly. Every unexplained explosion in France or Belgium became a potential V3 attack. Every shadowed hilltop a possible launch site. Intelligence briefings became exercises in dread. Each new piece of information adding weight to the fear that the war might pivot on a single, monstrous invention. Despite the mounting evidence, some Allied commanders remained skeptical. Could a weapon of such unimaginable power truly exist? Could it function as described? It wasn't until multiple independent reports converged, including eyewitness accounts from civilians and prisoners, that disbelief gave way to grim acceptance. The V3 was real. It was not only operational, but potentially unstoppable if it reached full deployment. By the end of 1944, the picture was terrifyingly clear. The Germans had created a weapon that could strike with precision, reach farther than any artillery before it, and devastate entire cities without warning. The Allies were faced with an enemy whose technological advantage could not be underestimated, a weapon that turned the familiar rules of warfare upside down and challenged their very sense of security. And yet, in the midst of fear, the Allies also glimpsed a sliver of hope. Every intercepted communication, every spy report, every reconnaissance photo was a clue. Each revealed weakness could be exploited. If they moved quickly and intelligently, perhaps they could neutralize the threat before the V3's fury was unleashed. But time was slipping away. With every passing day, the shadow of this terrifying weapon grew longer, and the world teetered closer to a catastrophe that might never be forgotten. The urgency in the Allied command rooms was palpable. Maps of northern France and Belgium were spread across tables, dotted with pins, red strings, and hastily scribbled notes. Every general, every intelligence officer felt the weight of what they were facing. The V3 was no longer a distant threat. It was a ticking time bomb, hidden deep within forests and fortified bunkers, and the Allies had precious little time to act. Strategic meetings stretched late into the night. Eisenhower and his advisors debated the options: sabotage the installations before the weapon became operational, intercept its test firings, or gather more intelligence to understand its true capabilities. Every plan was fraught with risk. One misstep, one exposure, and entire missions could collapse, leaving the V3 free to wreak devastation. Tension crackled in the room like static before a storm. Each suggestion was met with cautious scrutiny, each decision carrying the weight of potential catastrophe. Behind enemy lines, spies and reconnaissance teams faced dangers that tested courage and nerves. One Allied operative, codenamed Falcon, navigated the dense forests under the cover of darkness, photographing massive gun barrels partially hidden by camouflage scaffolding. Every crackling branch, every distant shout threatened to expose him. The Germans were vigilant, their patrols relentless, and even the smallest mistake could mean capture or death. Yet Falcon pressed on, knowing that each image, each scrap of intelligence, could be the key to stopping a weapon that might decimate London or Paris. The work of gathering intelligence was painstaking. Intercepted messages had to be decrypted, photographs analyzed, and rumors verified. False leads abounded, and for every clue that brought hope, there were setbacks that amplified fear. One report suggested the Germans were accelerating production, completing sections of the V3 in record time. Another hinted that the weapon's first test could happen within weeks. The Allies realized they were in a race against not just time, but against a brilliant and ruthless enemy whose technology seemed almost untouchable. Dramatic near-discoveries added to the suspense. In one instance, a small sabotage team sneaked into a facility only to retreat at the last moment, narrowly avoiding detection by a German patrol. In another, an intercepted radio transmission hinted that the Germans were aware of spy movements in the region, and for a brief moment, the entire intelligence network feared compromise. Each close call underscored the razor-thin margin between success and disaster, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on every officer and operative involved. Meanwhile, the V3 itself advanced at a terrifying pace. Construction crews worked day and night, assembling massive gun barrels and complex firing mechanisms. Test chambers were built and reinforced, designed to withstand the immense recoil and explosive power of the shells. Scientists monitored calculations, adjusted angles, and prepared for trials that could send destruction hundreds of miles away. Every report reaching Allied intelligence painted a picture of unstoppable progress, a sense of doom looming over the European landscape. In the midst of this chaos, leaders grappled with impossible questions. Could a small team of saboteurs really halt such a formidable weapon? Was it safer to wait for more intelligence, risking the weapon's deployment in the meantime? Or should they strike immediately, gambling everything on the hope that plans would succeed? Each decision carried lives, millions of them, and with every passing day, the countdown to potential catastrophe ticked closer to zero. Amid the tension, moments of human resolve shone through. Soldiers and spies displayed extraordinary courage, risking everything for the greater good. Plans were drafted, rehearsed, and executed with precision. Each successful reconnaissance flight, each coded message decrypted, provided a sliver of hope in a world overshadowed by fear. Yet the shadow of the V3 hung over every action, a silent reminder that failure was unthinkable. By the end of 1944, it was clear the Allies were in a desperate race against time. The Germans had engineered a weapon capable of altering the course of the war, and stopping it would require cunning, bravery, and precise execution. Every mission, every decision, carried the weight of the world's future. The fate of millions teetered on the edge, and the shadow of the V3 stretched ever closer. And as night fell over the forests of northern Europe, spies crouched in the darkness, generals pored over maps, and the world held its breath, unaware of just how close it was to annihilation. The first reports arrived at Allied command in the dead of night, each one more alarming than the last. The Germans had fired the V3 in operational conditions for the first time, and the sheer power of the weapon was immediately apparent. Intelligence officers described it as a thunderous roar, a force that shook the ground for miles around. Early test shells traveled farther than anyone had anticipated, obliterating everything in their path and leaving a trail of smoke and fire that could be seen from the skies. News of the attack spread like wildfire among both military personnel and civilians. Soldiers stationed in nearby regions reported feeling the earth tremble beneath their feet, their ears ringing from the sheer force of the blasts. Villages in the projected path of the shells were evacuated in haste, families fleeing into the dark woods with only what they could carry. Fear gripped everyone. No one knew exactly when or where the next strike would land. The uncertainty was as terrifying as the destruction itself. Allied generals convened emergency meetings, poring over reconnaissance photos and damage reports. The weapon's destructive potential was staggering. A single shell could demolish entire city blocks, flatten military installations, and disrupt supply lines crucial to the Allied advance into Germany. The V-3's long range meant that even locations deep within Allied-controlled territory were no longer safe. Every planned operation, every maneuver had to be reconsidered. For the first time in the war, the Allies faced a weapon that could render their strategic advantage meaningless. Reports from civilians and soldiers alike painted a harrowing picture. Windows shattered from the concussive force, homes crumbled, and fires erupted in the aftermath. Smoke hung in the air, acrid and suffocating, as the stench of burning buildings and scorched earth filled the surroundings. In one harrowing account, a small town's residents were forced to flee in darkness, guided only by the dim glow of fires from destroyed blocks. Children clutched their mothers, and soldiers tried to maintain order, but panic spread faster than any order could contain. The psychological impact of witnessing such devastation cannot be overstated. Soldiers who had faced artillery barrages and aerial bombings found themselves shaken in ways they had never anticipated. The V-3's power was unlike anything they had encountered, precise, relentless, and utterly devastating. It was a weapon that struck fear into the hearts of men, not only because of the destruction it caused, but because of its sheer unpredictability. There was no warning, no chance to prepare. One moment life continued as normal. The next, the earth itself seemed to erupt around them. Historical accounts later revealed just how close the weapon came to altering the course of the war. The German plan was ambitious. Multiple V-3 installations aimed at key Allied cities, each capable of launching a continuous stream of devastating shells. Had the project reached full operational capacity, it could have caused massive disruption to supply lines, crippled civilian morale, and possibly stalled the Allied advance into German territory. The potential loss of life was staggering, and Allied leadership understood that neutralizing the V-3 had become an absolute priority. Amid the chaos, reconnaissance reports showed the engineers and crews operating with frightening efficiency. Men moved like shadows, loading shells into the massive barrels, adjusting targeting mechanisms with meticulous precision, and monitoring pressure and trajectory calculations. Every movement was calculated, efficient, and deadly. Observers later described the scene as surreal, a monstrous weapon surrounded by meticulous order, prepared to rain destruction across nations with terrifying accuracy. The Allies' first attempt to respond was desperate and tense. Bombers were dispatched to strike the sites, but the Germans had constructed deep bunkers and extensive camouflage, making it nearly impossible to hit the weapon directly. Reconnaissance planes flew over forests and rivers, snapping photographs, while anti-aircraft fire screamed from below. Every mission carried immense risk. Every miscalculation could result in loss of life or the exposure of vital intelligence. And yet, in the midst of fear, courage emerged. Soldiers and spies undertook daring operations to monitor the V-3, to understand its mechanics, and to plan its eventual destruction. Each report, each observation, provided clues to its weaknesses, but the threat remained overwhelming. For those witnessing its power firsthand, the lesson was clear. The V-3 was a weapon capable of reshaping history, a force of destruction that could have brought nations to their knees if allowed to operate unchecked. As night fell over northern Europe, the echoes of the first strikes lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed them. The roar of the gun, the fires in distant towns, and the trembling earth had etched themselves into memory, a terrifying reminder of the stakes. The world had glimpsed the destructive potential of a weapon that almost tipped the balance of the war. And the Allies now faced a race against time more critical than ever. Every day that passed without neutralizing the V-3 increased the danger. Every test, every new deployment reminded the Allies that their adversary had created something far more than a weapon. It had created a nightmare that loomed over Europe. Waiting to strike again, the Allies had finally moved from alarm to action. Intelligence briefings had made it painfully clear. The V-3 was no longer a distant threat. It was operational, deadly, and capable of wreaking havoc at an unprecedented scale. In response, a series of bold and meticulously planned missions were set into motion, designed to cripple the weapon before it could be fully deployed. These were not the conventional battles of frontline infantry or artillery. These were covert operations, executed with precision, ingenuity, and nerves of steel. One of the first missions targeted a key production facility hidden deep within the forests of northern France. Soldiers and engineers had risked their lives to gather detailed blueprints of the facility, noting weak points in its massive walls and defenses. The plan was audacious. A small team would infiltrate the facility under cover of night, plant explosives at critical points, and escape before the German guards even knew what had happened. Every member of the team understood the stakes. A single mistake could mean capture, torture, or death, and if the mission failed, the V3 would continue to threaten cities across Europe. The night of the operation, fog blanketed the forest, muting footsteps and masking movements. The team advanced cautiously, hearts pounding with every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves. They encountered sentries, their lamps swinging lazily through the darkness. Using hand signals and whispers, the soldiers moved with practiced precision, slipping past patrols as if they were ghosts. One soldier froze as a guard stopped mere feet away, their eyes meeting in a tense, unspoken exchange of wills. Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity, until the guard turned and disappeared into the shadows. Relief was temporary. Danger was ever present. Inside the facility, the team worked with methodical efficiency, setting charges on machinery that powered the massive gun barrels and sabotaging key components that could halt production for weeks. The tension was almost unbearable. Every beep of machinery, every echoing step outside the walls, made their hearts race. Yet the mission succeeded. The facility was crippled, at least temporarily, and the threat from that location was neutralized. The team retreated into the night, their success tempered by exhaustion and the haunting knowledge that many more V3 installations remained. Meanwhile, spies continued their high-stakes work behind enemy lines. One agent, disguised as a local laborer, infiltrated a construction site, photographing blueprints and noting weak points in the weapons assembly. Each encounter with German engineers brought a surge of adrenaline. One slip of the tongue, one misstep, and discovery was certain. These reports were smuggled back to Allied intelligence, sometimes carried in hollowed-out boots or sewn into coats. The bravery required was extraordinary, the stakes unimaginable. Yet these agents persevered, knowing that every detail they captured could save thousands of lives. Even as successes emerged, setbacks reminded the Allies of the weapon's danger. In one mission, a team attempting to sabotage a launch site was forced to retreat when reinforcements arrived unexpectedly. Explosions from nearby training shells nearly gave them away, and bullets ricocheted dangerously close. The operatives escaped, but the mission's partial failure was a bitter reminder of the razor-thin line between success and disaster. Each encounter reinforced the tension, keeping soldiers and commanders alike on edge. Amid these operations, the Allies also leveraged technology and innovation. Reconnaissance planes conducted daring low-altitude flights to capture images of camouflaged installations, while codebreakers worked tirelessly to decipher intercepted communications. Every discovery informed the next mission, every intelligence update a lifeline in the escalating struggle. The Allies were learning to think like the Germans, anticipating their moves and exploiting weaknesses with surgical precision. Heroism and ingenuity defined this period. One team diverted German guards by creating a controlled explosion miles from the intended target, drawing attention away from the real sabotage operation. Another team used improvised tools to jam machinery temporarily, buying critical time for the Allies to plan larger-scale strikes. These moments of ingenuity, often born from desperation, highlighted the remarkable resourcefulness of ordinary men and women thrust into extraordinary circumstances. As these missions unfolded, a sense of momentum began to build. The tide, which had seemed perilously close to tipping in Germany's favor, now hinted at change. Each successful sabotage, each piece of intelligence uncovered, gradually undermined the weapon's operational potential. The V3, which had loomed over Europe like an unstoppable shadow, was beginning to show vulnerabilities. Yet uncertainty still loomed. Intelligence reports suggested that some installations were more fortified than anticipated, and the Germans were adapting, accelerating construction, and improving defenses. Every step forward came with the knowledge that the enemy was watching, learning, and preparing countermeasures. The Allies could not afford complacency. The war's outcome and countless lives depended on continued vigilance, courage, and innovation. By the end of these early operations, the Allies had achieved what once seemed impossible. They had struck back against a weapon designed to inspire terror, demonstrating that human courage, clever tactics, and relentless determination could challenge even the most formidable technological threat. But the war was far from over. The V3 still existed, still posed danger, and the true test of Allied resolve was yet to come. As night fell on yet another tense day, soldiers and spies alike reflected on the delicate balance of hope and fear. They had won small victories, but the shadow of the weapon still stretched across Europe. The world had glimpsed the potential of human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds, and it was a glimpse that promised both triumph and peril in equal measure. The final phase of the Allied campaign against the V3 was a race against the clock, a desperate effort to neutralize a weapon that had already shown glimpses of its devastating power. By early 1945, intelligence reports indicated that multiple launch sites were nearing full operational capacity. Each passing day increased the risk that the Germans could unleash destruction on a scale the world had never seen. The Allies knew that failure was not an option. One of the most critical missions involved a daring raid on the primary V3 installation in northern France. A small contingent of commandos, chosen for their experience and nerve, moved through the dense winter forests under the cover of darkness. Their orders were precise: infiltrate the facility, plant explosives at the foundation of the massive gun barrels, and escape before the German engineers could react. Every step of the mission was measured, every movement calculated. The tension was suffocating. Even a single misstep could mean certain death and the unleashing of catastrophe. As the commandos approached the installation, the enormity of their task became terrifyingly clear. The massive barrels of the V3 towered over the forest, reinforced with steel and concrete, designed to withstand bombardment and sabotage. Guards patrolled relentlessly, searchlights cutting through the mist like piercing blades. Heartbeats quickened with every snap of a branch or distant shout. One soldier nearly tripped over exposed roots, frozen in fear as a guard passed just yards away. Time seemed to stretch into an eternity, and every second brought the possibility of discovery. Inside the facility, the team worked with grim determination. Explosives were carefully placed at key points, machinery sabotaged to halt production, and wires connected to detonation devices with meticulous care. Each man understood the stakes. Success would save countless lives. Failure could mean annihilation for cities far beyond their sight. The tension was unbearable, yet their focus never wavered. When the charges were finally set, the team retreated into the darkness, hearts pounding, listening for the first sign of disaster. Moments later, explosions ripped through the facility. The thunderous roar echoed across the forest, shaking the ground beneath the commandos' feet. Concrete and steel were torn apart, the massive barrels reduced to twisted wreckage. The mission had succeeded, but the cost had been high in tension and nerve. One false move, one miscalculation, and the team could have been trapped or killed. Every member exhaled in relief, though the adrenaline still coursed through their veins. Elsewhere, other operations were unfolding simultaneously. Sabotage teams targeted secondary sites, destroying transport routes and disabling critical machinery. Reconnaissance planes monitored for German reinforcements, ready to call in support if needed. The Allies' coordinated effort was precise and relentless, demonstrating the power of strategy, courage, and determination against a seemingly unstoppable weapon. Reflections from military leaders after the missions painted a stark picture of how close the world had come to disaster. General Eisenhower reportedly remarked on the razor-thin margin that separated victory from potential devastation, noting that if the V-3 had been deployed just a few weeks earlier, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Every officer and soldier involved understood that the success of these operations had prevented a calamity of unimaginable scale. The relief was palpable, yet tinged with the memory of what could have happened. Even as the immediate danger receded, lingering tension remained. Intelligence continued to monitor for signs of other hidden installations, wary that the Germans might attempt to rebuild or relocate the weapon. Soldiers remained vigilant. Spies continued to risk their lives behind enemy lines, and commanders planned for contingencies. The V-3, though neutralized, had left its mark on the minds of all who had witnessed or heard of its destructive potential. Civilians, once gripped by fear, cautiously returned to towns near the destroyed sites. Smoke still rose from the wreckage, a stark reminder of what had almost been. Families rebuilt, soldiers patrolled, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Yet everyone knew the shadow of the V-3 would linger in history, a chilling testament to the thin line between order and chaos. In the quiet moments that followed the missions, those involved often reflected on the human courage that had prevented disaster. Ordinary men and women had acted with extraordinary bravery, ingenuity, and resilience. Their actions had not only saved lives, but had ensured that the course of the war remained in the hands of the Allies. The relief was profound, yet the memory of what might have been remained vivid, a haunting echo of near catastrophe. As night fell across northern Europe, the forests and destroyed installations were silent. The V-3, a weapon that had once threatened to reshape the war, now lay in ruins. The world had glimpsed the destructive power humanity could unleash, and it had survived by inches, by courage, and by ingenuity. The narrow escape was complete, yet the shadow of fear and the knowledge of how close disaster had come would linger, a stark reminder that the horrors of war often hinge on the smallest margins. The V-3, once a shadowy terror looming over Europe, now existed only in the rubble of its destroyed installations and in the memories of those who had faced its threat. Its near use left a mark on history, a chilling reminder of how close the world had come to devastation. Military leaders, historians and civilians alike, would later reflect on the razor-thin line that had separated disaster from survival. Recognizing that the weapon's potential could have reshaped the course of World War II in a single, thunderous moment, intelligence had been the Allies' lifeline. Intercepted messages, reconnaissance photographs, and daring spy missions had illuminated the shadow of the V-3 long before it could strike in earnest. Without the bravery and ingenuity of the men and women who risked their lives behind enemy lines, the massive gun could have remained undiscovered until it was too late. Every photograph taken, every blueprint smuggled out of occupied territory, and every secret report decoded contributed to a chain of events that ultimately prevented catastrophe. In the balance of history, human courage and calculated risk had triumphed over the cold logic of engineering and destruction. Yet the legacy of the V-3 was not only one of near misses and daring missions. It was a stark illustration of the terrifying capabilities that emerge when technology, ideology, and ambition collide. Scientists and engineers, driven by genius and fanaticism, had created something extraordinary and horrifying. Their work served as a reminder that human innovation, when unchecked by morality or restraint, can yield power capable of upending nations. The V3's design, its destructive potential, and the meticulous planning behind it left a haunting impression on all who studied it. Even in victory, uncertainty lingered. Intelligence teams remained vigilant, aware that other hidden weapons projects might still exist, shrouded in secrecy, waiting for the opportunity to emerge. The world had seen firsthand the power of a weapon almost unleashed, and knew that similar threats could arise in the shadows of history. That lingering tension, the sense that danger often exists just beyond the visible, became part of the lesson learned from the V3: vigilance. Preparedness and courage are eternal necessities. For modern audiences, the story of the V3 resonates beyond its historical context. It is a testament to the terror of what almost was. The destruction that could have been wrought had bravery, intelligence, and decisive action faltered. It is a reminder that the course of history often hinges on human choice, on courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and on the courage to act decisively when the stakes are unimaginably high. The world came perilously close to witnessing devastation on a scale that is difficult to fathom, and the survival of cities, lives, and hope itself rested on the narrowest of margins. In the quiet aftermath, as Europe began to heal and the war approached its final chapters, the V3 became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of human ingenuity, both terrifying and heroic, a testament to the thin line between annihilation and salvation, and a story of courage, strategy, and resilience that would echo through generations. It reminded the world that history is shaped not only by battles won and lost, but by the unseen hands that act in the shadows to prevent disaster before it strikes. And so, while the V3 no longer fires its deadly shells, its shadow remains, a chilling emblem of the potential for destruction that lurks in secrecy, and a stark warning. Sometimes, the most terrifying moments in history are those that almost happened. The terror of what almost was continues to haunt the imagination, reminding humanity that vigilance, intelligence, and courage are the shields that safeguard the future.